Hello everyone, Chris Martinson here, CEO of Peak Prosperity, and I'm here with your video update. And today is Saturday, November 24, 2018. I want to talk to you about the possibility of systemic collapse in the ecosystems. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about insect loss and neonicotinoids, and these all connect to the markets and the way we run markets. So a recent piece I just wrote went up on Friday. It's called it's about being at the precipice, and it's notes from the precipice. And because we're really at the precipice in a lot of ways. And this is really disturbing. You've heard me talk about the loss of insects before, and the reason I keep harping on it is because it freaks me out. You can't lose the bottom of the food chain without serious things happening as a consequence, unknowable things happening as a consequence. And so this would be a plea for a little bit of humility. And so the good news of this last week was that France decided to ban all 5 major neonicotinoid pesticides. Complete ban, both for outdoor use and indoor greenhouse use. Huge, bold step. And I applaud it. A lot of people online, I don't know if they're Monsanto trolls or Bayer trolls or Syngenta trolls, I don't know. But a lot of people came out and said, oh, this is a bad idea, because the science doesn't support that. Look, here's what the science does support. Let me just read you some stuff here, okay? The first is, let's talk about this. Just came out, just in October 15th in Washington Post, but you might have seen it in a lot of other outlets. This was widely reported, not on the front pages of the newspapers. This still came up in the science section. It should be on the front page. But it talks about the hyper-alarming, that's the word, hyper-alarming study shows massive insect loss. And what this talks about is that over the past 35 years, all sorts of invertebrates, beetles, bees, have decreased by an average of 45% worldwide in places where long-term insect data are available, mainly in Europe. Insect numbers are plummeting. A study last year showed 76% decrease in flying insects. Those are the ones they were measuring. They just happened to be doing these studies where they measured flying insects in Germany. In German nature preserves, this isn't like next to the farm fields. In nature preserves, this is the kind of declines that are being noted. We've now seen that there are in the national forests, completely wild preserves. If you went up to them in Puerto Rico, you'd feel like, because you are, not around any human habitation. And yet there too, we're seeing these hyper alarming insect losses across all genera of insects, all genus species. It's astonishing. And the article I wrote this last week about being at the precipice basically says that if we lived in an intact culture, we would say, stop. What are we doing? What's new? What do we need to do to reverse this? Because whatever we're doing is very bad to insect life. And I wrote an article in 2015 where I clearly fingered neonicotinoid pesticides. Tons of data out there about it. Here's the thing about the neonicotinoids. They are very, very toxic to birds. Depending on the species, very toxic to mildly toxic, but toxic to birds and almost all invertebrates. It's really fairly toxic stuff. And it doesn't just kill the bugs that we're trying to get at in the farmers' fields. It kills any insects pretty much that get in touch with this stuff. And the thing that's really alarming about this is you can easily overlay a map of the use of the neonicotinoid pesticides with the loss of insects, and you see this really nice overlapping or horrifying overlapping that happens. So France went ahead and banned them. And you wouldn't believe the number of people coming out, oh my God, how are we going to feed people? We'll have to use the old bad pesticides, as if a new pesticide by definition was better. That's the myth of progress right there. Oh, it's new. It must be better. New and improved. No. These things are awful. They're awful. So here's one. One of the measures of awfulness in my world about a pesticide is how persistent it is. You spray it on the field, and then the question is, how persistent is it? Well, this was one of the features. I consider it a bug, but one of the features of neonics, which was that you could coat a seed with this stuff and plant the seed. And by the time, say, a corn plant is fully expressed into a mature plant, there's enough toxicity absorbed through the seed into the growing plant such that at the mature plant level, if a corn borer or some other insect munches on that corn, it dies, right? So it's fairly toxic stuff, but they like that persistence, because if you put it on the seed and then it washed off in the first rain and it didn't go into the plant, you wouldn't want that. But here's the other measure. It's measured by something called half-life. So if you take 100 units of a compound and then you start a clock running and you ask how long before only half of that is left, the rest of it's degraded into some other set of breakdown products. But how long before half is left, that's the half-life. The half-life for neonics is 1,000 days, which means that nearly 3 years later after you apply this stuff, half of it is still there poking around in the environment. So let's imagine now what happens. And by the way, after 2,000 days, how much is left? Well, you have a half-life of 1,000 days, so that went to 50%. Another half-life, now we're at 25%. So 25% of it is still left after 2,000 days, right? So this stuff is very persistent. And the farmers don't apply it every 1,000 days. It gets applied at least once every 365 days, right? So you can imagine the levels of this stuff out there are just accumulating. And that's indeed the case. It's now found in rivers all over the world, and it's found in soils. It's found all over the place, right? So we've really been loading this stuff up. Meanwhile, what you've noticed, if you've been paying attention over the last 20 years or so since these neonics were first introduced to today, is that you can drive long distances through lush territory in July and August and not hit anything with your windshield. No insects. That bug splatter has been reduced by, I'm going to guess, at least 95 to 98% based on my just anecdotal personal observations. I mean, some big amount, because now I can drive all the way 6 hours to upstate New York and back again, 12 hours of driving, and often experience 0 to 1 bug strikes, where it used to be measured in hundreds. So that's something that's I've noticed. You've probably noticed it as well. So France went ahead and said, let's get rid of these things, which, by the way, is really smart. Here's my analogy for that. Because a lot of people are like, oh, we don't know if the science, this is irresponsible. I don't know how many of them either absorbed paid propaganda from the chemical industry or actually paid by the chemical industry. I don't know. But for whatever reason, we have a really high amount of noise out there protesting this is a bad idea. Here's how I look at it, though. So say we don't know why the insects are disappearing. But one thing we can be sure of is that this problem really arose and has been accelerating the last 20 years. So the first thing an intelligent person would do is they would rewind and say, let's just start doing whatever we were doing 20 years ago and let's yank everything off the market that got introduced since, right? It's kind of like my analogy for this is, let's say one day you wake up and you are covered head to toe in hives, and you've had an anaphylactic shock. It was a really dangerous emergency. You had to go to the ER. They had to pump you full of steroids and all kinds of things just to get you back from the brink. A prudent person would say, whatever I ate in the last 24 hours, I'm going to call that, I'm not going to eat any more of those things until I figure out what's going on. That would be the prudent thing. We are at a full insect emergency right now. It's really bad. And this is just part and parcel of the whole growth at any cost. We have to grow. Bayer's got profits. Oh my God, there might be jobs at stake. This gets complicated now. Maybe we should think about a limited application use. Maybe we should figure out how we could tell them to start applying these things a little bit less under different circumstances. Stop. That's not what you do. What you do when you're facing a full-on emergency is you immediately stop doing the things that got you into it, right? So the neonics, tons of evidence. Good for you, France. My prediction that I made in this article is that in 5 years, France is going to, if they continue with this ban, 5 years, France is going to have this beautiful resurgence of insect populations coming at, glorious beetles, beautiful butterflies, all manner of things, and the birds that feed on them. They're going to see spring and summer will have noise in them again. I don't know if you've noticed this, but even crickets where I live, I hardly hear them at night anymore. The cacophony of August and September is down to a whisper. And that silencing of the landscape is a terrifying thing. And to the extent that we've had this extraordinary growth at any cost, we have to just grow, that we've had central authorities printing money because we need growth and all this stuff is just insane. It's time to admit that growth, the era of growth, is over, It's time to admit that we should have a money system that serves us rather than the other way around. That we, the people, do not need growth. The banking system does. Credit markets do, but these are abstractions. You know what? Sad truth. The entire banking system could go belly up and completely fold up shop and nobody would miss it. Not for a minute. Not if we had a money system that was working by, of, and for us. There's no reason why the U.S. Treasury Department or your equivalent Treasury Department in your country cannot simply print and issue its own money. Money is a commodity. It literally has no value except the one we ascribe to it. So if your central taxing authority is busy taxing the very money that it is not in control of producing, has anybody stopped to ask why? Why would we do it that way? Why would we risk killing everything on this planet simply so we can preserve for a little longer a money system that's fundamentally broken? You realize that, right? Your money system, and I don't care where you're listening to this from, I can say this about your money system because they're all the same, is based on exponential growth. It requires constant exponential growth in order to be stable and be happy. So that's what's breaking down right now in part 2 of this article I wrote, starting talking about the environment and economy a little bit. I talk about financially, we have 7 very strong indicators that a recession is coming. I focus on the financial markets a lot. Why? Because everybody cares about their pocketbook. It's non-denominational. It's non-political. It's a way to begin to reach people with this idea that things are changing. By the way, regardless of what was happening with insects, this third large credit bubble, the birth child of the central banks, it's bursting. And it was going to burst sooner or later. And until and unless they actually reverse course and start printing a lot more money, that's how it's going to be. So you should come by, check that out. We've got a great set of reports there. We've got some really amazing podcasts up this week. We've got a ton more coming in the pipeline. So check those out and join the conversation. And please do everything you can to be prepared for what's coming. With that, I'll see you next week.